it's our real pleasure to bring in Jim Cuddy from Blue Rodeo. Jim, thanks so much for joining Stephen Brunt and myself. Stephen and I talked about this a little bit, and I know we talked about it with Dave as well. We kind of had time to prepare for this. I think we wanted, as I said, time to go as slowly as possible in Gord's case. What was your reaction when you got the news and your first memory, your first thought of Gord and the band?
Well, I think I was like everybody. I thought that he was going to be the miracle boy. I thought he was going to carry on much longer than the prognosis predicted. But, it's a shock. It's been a bad year for losses. And Gord was such a life force. It seems hard to imagine that in the, among the constellations of the music world, there's no Gord Downie. It's just almost unimaginable.
Jim, as someone who understands what it requires to stand up and perform in front of a hockey rink full of people, what were you thinking watching that last tour play out and watching Gord kind of fight the fight to get through that last tour?
Well, it seemed really brave. It's also, I think that as an older person, you contemplate what does an individual do when they get a death sentence, and the fact that Gord chose to go and make music for people, and it must have been a great physical challenge for him, is kind of heartening. I think that as opposed to retreating and to the bosom of your family or just being among nature, he chose to go out and ply his trade. And I think that we in the music community all felt really reassured by that we were doing the right thing, that this was a good endeavor, and Gord kind of confirmed that by going out and doing that tour.
Jim, anytime I think of Gord and I think of the Tragically Hip, and I'm not just saying this because this is a sports show, but I think of hockey. There's a lot of things I think of. I think of drinking. Let's be honest. I think of drinking beer around the campfire and at the cottage first. That's the first thing I think of. But beyond that, I think of hockey. Why is that beyond something in me? Because I think a lot of people feel that way.
Well, there certainly is this symbiotic relationship between hockey players and musicians. And I think there's similarities in the life and that, but I think there's also similarities in the thrill that one gets from doing your job. And even though Gord was a dreaded Boston Bruins fan, which made me sick, his love of hockey and the mysterious man that used to walk across the street and play in Withrow Park as a goalie who keep his mask on, his approach to hockey was very ritualistic, like he was. And he appreciated all aspects of behavior within the game, and the honor and the dishonor and the history. And, his focus was always, again, on his own team. But he just appreciated so much of the philosophical resonance of hockey. And I think that's the way Canadians are. We're often depicted as hosers, and yet we actually have quite a complex and deep understanding of our game, and we have very high expectations of the behavior of the people that play it. So I think that it was the perfect sport for Gord, and I think that was reflected in his fans.
It always seems to me, Jim, as if every hockey player wants to be a musician and every musician wants to be a hockey player. I know I'm not the first person to say that. I admit it, but it's true, isn't it?
Heard hockey players play, then
you may be talking to the right.
They play hockey,
and you may have made that observation of the right guy. I'm thinking too. Jim, the timelines, Blue Rodeo, the Hip, are reasonably close timelines. You cross over a lot. Do you remember the first time you saw the Hip and what you made of them?
Yeah. We were playing at the Misty Moon in Halifax. So Halifax had two bars that were kind of the standard bars back in the mid-'80s, Misty Moon and the Crazy Horse.
Yeah.
Crazy Horse was in Dartmouth. Misty Moon was in downtown Halifax. And they were the bars that ran till 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, and they were just a horror show between 2 and 3. But they were the ones where you sort of cut your teeth. And we played the Misty Moon and we must have finished early because then we went across to Dartmouth to see the Hip. And I'd heard about the Hip but didn't know them. They're quite a bit younger than we are, but sort of started at the same time. They started young, we started old. And Gord was singing the Doors song, woke up this morning, got myself a beer, and he was running all over the stage and on the amps and everything like that. And he was that kind of demonic force that he later channeled into so many things. But we were impressed, and then of course when we talked to them, they were just like us, and I have a lot of history with Kingston at that point, so obviously we had lots of talking points. So yeah, and our careers are they run concurrent for almost all, and and so many similarities. And Gord was always the one that when people would, we would get that question a lot. Why are you popular in Canada and not popular in the States? And Gord was always the example I used that when Canadians looked at the Hip and watched Gord do his thing, they knew who he was. They'd been to school with somebody like him. It was a very familiar character. You take that across the border, and people are looking at him wondering what the hell he's doing. And I think it was one of the greatest examples for me of the cultural difference that the 49th parallel separates. Gord was a very familiar character and very easily accepted by all Canadians.
In conversation with Jim Cuddy on the Jeff Blair Show with Stephen Brun on Sportsnet 590, The Fan, and on the Sportsnet television network. What will be? This seems a difficult question, Jim, and I'm going to apologize in advance, but because of such a rich life and such a textured life, what's going to be Gords' legacy, and what will be the Tragically Hip's legacy? And I'm going to, presuming the Tragically Hip doesn't tour again. I don't know what their plans are, but what will their legacy be? What will Gord's legacy be from a musician's point of view?
Right. Well, they will be sort of forever known as one of the bands that put Canada on the map in Canada, and I think that's a very significant point because if you go back to the mid '80s, then you have a lot of bands that were trying for international success, but they kind of sound like other bands. They sound like bands that are around the world. And then you have a crop of bands that don't sound like anybody else but themselves, the Tragically Hip being the leader. Nobody sounds like the Tragically Hip, for better or for worse. Whether you like them or not, you have to acknowledge the impact they had on making Canadians feel good about themselves. And Gord he was the engine that propelled that machine, and his blend of hoser philosophy and poetry and abstract behavior, that somehow was the pastiche of the Canadian character, and I think all people can relate to that. And it was the beginning of people not caring what bands did in the rest of the world. The Hip had quite a sizable following in the States. I don't think that mattered a hoot to anybody in Canada. And I think from within the community, Gord's uniqueness and his steadfast adherence to being himself, it was a real encouragement that you never felt like you had. You see musicians now, and they do things that are so clearly to preserve their popularity or something like that. Gord was never like that, and so everybody has so many examples of Gord being himself. I'll tell you one, because I got to make this a little funny, or I'm going to start to cry. So we played with the Eagles, and it was out in Newfoundland, and it was an amazingly hot day, and it was just a mess. The Eagles are just absolutely horrible. They're terrible to work with.
Yes.
Just horrible. So there was a whole slew of Canadian bands that were on before, and the Hip went on just before the Eagles. So by this point, we'd all heard that the Eagles needed to leave because their plane couldn't take off after a certain time. So Irving Azoff was at the side of the stage during the Hip set, and the Canadian bands played so well, and the Hip was just peaking. I mean, they were getting this crowd going. And he was doing the old shorten your set sign to Gord. He was looking at Gord, and, he's just a little guy, a little demonic guy, and he's doing the shorten the set. And Gord is spinning around, smiling and laughing. I think they cut a song. And I said to Gord afterwards, you must have been pissed off that he was telling you to shorten the set. He said, that was the greatest moment. I never thought Irving Azoff would be telling me to shorten it up. Oh, that was just awesome. Now that is Gord. That is just so Gord. 40,000 people there. He's entertaining, and he's smiling about this crazy guy telling him to shorten the set. And there's so many examples like that of how unique Gord was, and I think that translated all the time to people, and I think people really liked that. They liked that there was no capitulating to what people thought he should be.